to introduce somebody like Mark, who actually has been the introduction to a lot of his work, his oeuvre, his span, is actually things that any student of modern India would study. And that's the things Mark has covered, whether it is Indira Gandhi's years, it's Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's years, the difficult years in Sri Lanka, whether it is the emergency, Rajiv Gandhi, whether it is assassinations, liberalizations, change in a village in Purvanchal, small rallies in Balia. Mark has always been there. So, and his work sort of speaks volumes. He was, with the BBC, he was born in India. He's had a long Indian connect. His grandparents were married in a cathedral in Calcutta. Mark, of course, was born in Calcutta and went away, spent many wonderful days in Darjeeling in a boarding school till he went off to prep school in the UK and was back here as a reporter for the BBC. So we hope to share some of his insights, what he experienced, what he, did as a reporter, which a lot of us know and a lot of us don't. And, of course, how he reflects on the times that we live in and the way they are shaping up. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Seema.
Mark, would you like to say something?
Yes. Well, no, all I want to say is it's a great honor to be asked to attend one of these Addas. It's a great surprise to see so many people here. I'm reminded of an occasion once, when I was speaking in England, and a whole lot of people came, and I was surprised, and I said, I don't know why you all come, because I'm just a journalist. And after it was over, an old lady came up to me and said, I want to tell you why I've come. I've come because I think of you as my friend. And I always think of that as a tribute to what really has made me what I am, the wonderful medium of radio. If I am anything in life, I am a radio journalist at heart. And the other thing I always like to emphasize very strongly is that had I been reporting for the Telegraph or reporting perhaps for Deutsche Welle, I doubt if I would see as many people as this here. I was hugely lucky to be reporting for the BBC at a time when the BBC was very important because, by tradition, Indians turned to the BBC when the only alternative for them was a government-controlled medium. So really, in a way, I represent the BBC. I'm created by the BBC, but the modern BBC may not like to think I represent them now.
I'm sure that they don't, but we'll come to all of these things that you've raised, radio and the BBC, etc. In your most recent book, your Upcountry Tales, there is a very interesting thing. I've had the privilege of knowing you for a bit, but I didn't know that your great-great-grandfather was a sort of opium agent in Salempur in Gorakhpur, and your association with India sort of begins there. So tell me a bit about that, Mark. At a time when there's so much of, there's so many nationalisms competing in the world, there is this whole obsession with the idea of being, what nationalism means. You go to you're British, you're Indian. So how does that play out in your work?
Well, yes, it's true. My great-great-grandfather was actually an uncle of John Nicholson, who most of you know led the attack on Delhi when it was recovered by the British during the uprising. And he was an opium agent for 18 years before the uprising took place. And then the marriage took place of his daughter, and my grandfather was then born in Aurangabad. My mother was born in Bangladesh, and I was born in Calcutta. So I've always thought that one of the reasons for my connection with India is fate, is that I was meant to be connected with India, and I've always felt very much as though I belong here. But equally, if you've done your national service in Britain, if you've been to a university like Cambridge, if you've been to a public school as I went to, you can't shake all that off and say, I've become Indian. That's a nonsense thing to say. So I would say I hope I have something of India in me. I certainly do with my blood. But I can't claim, some people tell me you're more Indian than Indians and you know more about India. Well, all that is nonsense, absolute nonsense.
You spoke of shaking things off, Mark. You read theology and history at Trinity Hall, Cambridge. You did want to be a priest. So how did you shake the idea of priesthood off and take to journalism? I mean, how do these two worlds sit?
Well, how do you know I've shaken it off?
I'm just hoping.
Hoping. Well, I'm going to disappoint you. No, I have a huge admiration for priests and clergy. I have a huge love and affection for the Church of England. I am a regular communicant in the Cathedral Church of the Redemption here, so I haven't shaken it off. But as I get very old, I more and more realize that I haven't done a very good job of living up to it, and I certainly realize that I would have been a disaster as a priest. You know what was said to me when I left the college? In those days, and still am, a devotee of beer. And so the principal of the theological college said to me, no, the Bishop of Lincoln said to me, I think your place is more in the public house than in the pulpit.
So now more on sort of matters of state, matters less theological. You mentioned radio, Mark, and to a lot of people it would seem strange. Some of us have worked in radio about what makes... I can see some people who worked with radio, some of your former colleagues here as well. Radio has been pretty much been strangled at birth in India, so it's really not been allowed to take off. So what makes radio so special? And no doubt it contributed to what the BBC was and yourself and its amazing reach in India.
Well, you know, it's terribly sad about India that radio, either you have rubbish commercial radio or you have pure government radio. And I have to say, you know, I have great friends in All India Radio, and there is some very good radio done by All India Radio, but basically it's a government machine. But if you go to a country like India or America, take Britain, the most influential political program of the day is the Today program, The Breakfast Show. Now, I remember when television thought, oh, we'll cash in on this, we'll have our own breakfast show, they couldn't match it. They couldn't come up to it. And I always say, I think there are three things, really, which make radio special. One is the pictures on radio are your own. It's your imagination which is working. And that's why it was once said to me by a senior BBC executive, radio will always survive provided you don't put pictures to it. So all this accompanying radio with pictures on your computer, not a good idea. So one, you make the pictures yourself. Two, because you make the pictures yourself, they stick in your mind much more. And three, an interesting one, I think, because radio you usually listen to when you're on your own. You might be shaving or cooking the breakfast or whatever it is. It is a much more intimate medium than television is. And good radio broadcasting ought to be able to make the listener feel that the broadcaster is speaking to him or her directly. And that's why I told that story about the woman who came up to me, because clearly in that one case at least, I had succeeded in doing that. You know, if you just think to the days, for instance, perhaps when your mother read stories to you, if you just think to the heydays of radio, you will realize that actually there is something very special about just listening. I think that's the key to it, just listening.
Listen to something else currently. Anyway, television seems to be thriving a lot now, and a lot of people say that there's a. Could you please put your cell phones on silent mode? Thank you very much. And television, it seems to be stuck in some kind of a narrow casting kind of role it seems to have given itself. Is that also because radio has not really been allowed to take off? So television is forced to be really local in a way that...
well, I don't know.
In India?
Yes. No, I think the problem with television in India, certainly with television news, which I watch quite often, is that there is, and I know I'll be very unpopular in saying this, but there is a lack of professionalism about it. There's far too much concentration on actually doing radio, really, with the presenter speaking to the guy in the field, or with the presenter and a lot of people sitting around talking to each other. That can be much better done, actually, on radio. But last Sunday it was, I saw a film about Ved Prakash. Now, I don't know if you remember Ved Prakash, but he was an outstanding news cameraman. He won a huge international award for his coverage of Gandhi. Now, when you saw the stories that he had shot, you saw what it was like to have a cameraman who was thinking about the story all the time. What do I need to shoot to put the story together? How will this fit in with the story? Now, you hardly ever see a properly crafted story on Indian television, and far less often, and I believe, than you should do on international television stations as well. So it's all become far more boring, really.
Mark, I mean, just going back to some of the stories that really made you and the BBC kind of memorable and have they planted firmly in people's heads. And one is, of course, Indira Gandhi's assassination and the BBC talking about it, but state radio here not declaring it for hours on end. And you've had things to say about the role of rumour in times when information is officially suppressed like that. So take me through that day and how you found out and what happened. I mean, now, of course, you have 24/7 news. Can you imagine a situation like that in today's times when news is suppressed and just the BBC puts it out on a shortwave crackle?
Well, I'm happy to hear somewhere sitting in this crowd is someone who broadcasts the first news about Indira Gandhi. Stand up and be recognized, Satish Jacob.
He's not revealing himself.
He's hiding.
He is hiding. So
he doesn't usually.
He's gone radio.
He's waiting for Kamlesh to come down.
I see. Well, Satish, the story is this, that Princess Anne was in India and she was visiting Tibetan schools above Missouri. And so I was covering that story. And I overheard two policemen talking to each other and saying, Indira Gandhi's been shot. So I came down to Dehradun. I picked up Jilly there and came back to Delhi to find that Satish had done an immaculate job. He had scooped the world. He had gone up to the hospital, got into the hospital, and confirmed everything. And really, in many ways, there's no need for me to have come back at all. So that was the story of it. And I have to say, and I don't want to make Satish blush, but one of the keys to my success and one of the happiest relationships in my life has been 20 years working with Satish.